Happy Sunday, everybody. It's Asif, and I'm here to do an episode. Obviously, it's episode 84 of the original and the greatest 84 to ever play the game, Randy Gene Moss. So essentially, obviously, for those of you who don't know, Randy Moss is one of my favorite football players. I got inspired to play after watching him. And so, hopefully, this episode, it will be kind of pretty short and brief, but hopefully you guys find something insightful out of this episode. So, Randy obviously was drafted by the Vikings in 1998. Essentially, not top overall pick, but lottery pick. Essentially from there, obviously he burst on the scene. Minnesota in 1998. He set rookie records in receiving yards, touchdowns, and if to put in perspective, the Vikings were 9-7 prior to Randy getting there. And then, the 1998 season, they went 15-1 en route to the NFC Championship game, which, albeit a Gary Anderson missed kick, they would have made a Super Bowl appearance, potentially first Super Bowl win for that franchise. So, needless to say, his impact, was felt. He still holds that rookie T record, even though Justin Jefferson broke his receiving yards record. And, he came onto the scene with Chris Carter, and he kind of just really, embodied the type of player who didn't really care so much about the perception of kind of not being the guy who fans per se, like outside Minnesota fans who fans may or may not be able to gravitate to. Is very polarizing, right? 1999, 2000, the Vikings continued to enjoy success. I don't know if you guys can see it, but this guy right here, Chris Dishman, he basically was part of that 2000 Vikings team that made a NFC Championship game run. So the Vikings were able to kind of get close to reaching the pinnacle, but they ended up falling up short, right before, the Super Bowl. So, kind of to summarize Randy's, Minnesota tenure, he basically, had, just amazing seasons from 98 up through 04. And essentially kind of just really helped that team, make multiple NFC Championship game appearances, really deep playoff runs, and setting records, that were, a lot of them still untouchable. Obviously that rookie TD record is yet to be touched. And obviously helping the team kind of turn around. That's just how dominant he was. And I think the defensive back, I want to say, DeAngelo Hall basically said Randy was the most dangerous receiver he had to play against because of his underrated route running ability. That's how he was able to get open. Although he relied heavily on his athleticism and speed, he was very much an underrated route runner. After Minnesota, Randy's career took a different turn in the sense that he was just struggling. And he basically had to. He found himself, get traded to Oakland, and that was not a good run by any means. He had basically put on the team by saying he plays what he wants to, and he really felt like the team wasn't putting together a winning culture, a winning organization that was up to par with his standards. And obviously caliber player of his caliber, definitely should have the highest of standards for organizations. So I think, they even gave him a reward, but that didn't really do much for him. So right before the draft, so in 2007, during the draft, I think day one or day two, I think it was day one, New England announced that they had traded for Randy Moss. Randy arrived there. He ran routes for Bill Belichick, and Bill was just, in shock and awe from his workout, and Randy basically proved that he could still get out there and play. A lot of the criticism was the fact that he had not been dominated for almost 2 to 3 years since he was in Minnesota, and that was basically that. They're about to see why Bill Belichick is the greatest coach of all time with that trade. After basically Randy arrived in New England, he was able to do more or less of what he did in Minnesota and let his presence be felt. I mean, Tom Brady, before Randy got there, his career high single season touchdown passing high was around 20 touchdowns. The 07 Patriots obviously went 16-0. albeit they made the AFC Championship game the year prior and lost to the Colts in a nail biter. It still speaks to how Randy's impact, of a game changing, dominating receiver, just kind of emanated, throughout the locker room. And Teddy Bruschi was even on record to say that, and he's a few years later. But anyway, so kind of to summarize it, the Patriots go 16-0 in the regular season, and Randy basically sets another record for single season touchdowns. Breaking Jerry Rice's record, 23 in the 60-game season. Although Jerry set his record of 22 in a 12-game season, the strike shortened season. It's remarkable to say the least, because he basically helped Tom Brady kind of capitalize, or not necessarily capitalize, but basically to reach his, kind of realize his potential as a quarterback. Which we were able to kind of see come into fruition a few years later, when the Patriots changed from a top 4 defensive team to a top 4 offensive team. And so Tom Brady he threw 50 touchdowns in that season, right? And so 4,800 yards, 50 touchdowns, and he broke Peyton Manning's record, which was previously held by Dan Marino for most pass touchdowns in a season. So it was 49 and 48. And yeah, I mean, obviously the Patriots made it to the Super Bowl, Randy's first ever Super Bowl appearance. Randy was on record to say he was the greatest receiver of all time. And then obviously, the kind of people were kind of, treat him up for live for that. And then, the Patriots ended up getting upset in one of the greatest Super Bowls ever, the biggest upset, the greatest Super Bowl upset of all time. And obviously Randy ended up being meaningless. A couple years later, he ends up, having Pro Bowl numbers in 2009. He didn't make the Pro Bowl. He made the Pro Bowl in the first Team All-Pro, the 2007 season. But 2008, Tom Brady was injured, so he had to work with Matt Castle. 2009, Randy basically, had a great season as well. But he wasn't able to capitalize and make the Pro Bowl. But, basically 2010, things kind of really hit the fan. And he got traded to Tennessee, then from Tennessee to Minnesota. And then, things just didn't work out, right? He ended up kind of getting forced out of the league. Stephen A. Smith was on the first take saying Randy was the reason when the Patriots made the Super Bowl in the following season against the Giants in a rematch. Stephen A. Smith said the reason why Randy's not in Super Bowl is because of his own doing. So after that, basically, he took a sabbatical, and then 2012, the Niners, who were just fresh off an NFC Championship loss against the Giants, who were Super Bowl champions, needed some help at wide receiver for Alex Smith, and eventually who would be the starter, Colin Kaepernick, right? And that season, and lo and behold, Randy worked out, and they signed him, and his numbers don't really tell a story, right? I think he had around 600 yards, a few touchdowns, but he or 400 yards. But he really came up with some really big plays still, even though he was in his twilight years at the age of 35. And it was just, he really helped that team, even though the team was loaded, still kind of, make that playoff push and kind of get over the hump. So obviously a lot of that credits the run game as well. Harbaugh, Kaepernick, and then obviously in the Super Bowl, he comes short again. It's funny, both Randy Super Bowls, he lost by a margin of 3 points. The first one, Super Bowl 42, final score was, if I'm not mistaken, what was it, 17-14? And then Super Bowl 47, final score was around, what was it, 34-31, right? So Randy was just one of those dogs. I mean, he just came on the field, burst onto the field, made his presence felt. He was a dog as a receiver. He was a dog as a competitor, and he'd make you feel his presence. So, I mean, these were the reasons why I was a Randy Moss fan. I know many people didn't. He rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and kind of, his comments on quitting, not being able to go up the middle, not being able to kind of be a playmaker in big moments per se, which I mean, I think is somewhat debatable, but obviously not being able to kind of, catch any ball. Like, Jerry could do it all, right? In terms of kind of being able to run any route, catch any ball. Terrell T.O. could definitely go up the middle. And I have both their autographs on the other wall. You can't see it. But ultimately, I think Randy's legacy, is that, he kind of, he changed the way that offenses were kind of, where he changed the way that teams drafted. He changed the way offenses, had to be had to be game planned in the sense that having a receiver who could blow top off defenses and go and just dominate you vertically had not honestly been seen at that level, to that point in the league, in the NFL. And so Randy is really kind of his legacy in a nutshell is, of a guy who really just, I feel like he was misunderstood. And I also think a lot of it was just kind of Randy Moss, just trying to make stuff happen. Obviously, straight cash homie, infamous. I love kind of, the fact that he said he'd pay that fine that way. But yeah, I think Randy's, and ultimately, there's these debates rage on about, who's the greatest receiver in terms of kind of Jerry, Randy, because of Randy putting himself in the conversation. And, that kind of furthers the criticism of Randy being a self-centered kind of, I guess, just selfish teammate. But I ultimately I'm just a diehard fan. Randy kind of, helping the Niners make that last Super Bowl run before we went to a slump and before we came back to prominence, 7 years later, with Kyle Shanahan and the new and the current organization. It was cool to see, kind of Randy help the Niners kind of get back to that pinnacle. Even though obviously, Jerry was the reason why the Niners kind of realized that potential to begin with. So, but I think Randy obviously his legacy is just one that you have to really just put everything in perspective. You have to consider kind of his coaches, his quarterbacks, the organizations he had to play for. And, Oakland, he didn't have great quarterbacks. He didn't have great coaches. But, when he had a semblance of a good quarterback, such as, Cunningham, Culpepper during his peak in the early 2000s, obviously Brady, the GOAT, and even Kaepernick at that point in his career, Randy was able to kind of really, put in some solid production and, set some records. So these are the reasons why I'm a Randy Moss fan. Obviously, for those who follow me on IG, Randy D. Silva Love, Ellis God's autograph right there. 81, the Patriots was the reason I wore 81. But anyways, yeah, Randy Moss is the GOAT in my book. My opinion, right? Obviously, we all have our own opinions, but this is my opinion. That's why, for that many reasons more, I think we'll never see no Randy Moss again. Ultimately, outside of Jerry, I think Randy's just the only other guy you put in that conversation with the greatest. And a lot of our guys have cases too, but Randy's my number two. That's not even close between number three, but that's pretty much it. So yeah, thank you all for tuning in, and hope you enjoy this episode. God bless.